Good faith can save lives. I mean that literally. In the story I have to tell us today, and I mean it metaphorically in the way that a 2,000-year-old story can still apply and does. I really, really mean it. Good faith can save lives. It's the best good news I came to as I worked through the tale of Paul and Silas sitting in a Roman jail when an earthquake shook the ground beneath them. The start of this episode, which is found in the book of Acts, chapter 16, is a little convoluted. The setup for how Paul and Silas come to be in jail is really its own sermon. It deserves plenty of space because there's a lot of material to unpack. I'm going to have to short shrift the beginning of this story just a little bit so we get to the middle and the end. But we have time to walk through the basics. Paul and Silas are on a mission. They are on go to spread the word about Jesus Christ into the known world. This is about 20 years after Jesus was killed and resurrected. They have, at this point, been prompted by a dream of Paul's to go into a region called Macedonia, which is like modern-day Greece. And they're called into the city of Philippi. This is the same place that they met Lydia last week, if you were around. In fact, today's events take place pretty much right after last week's message events. While staying in Philippi for some amount of time, Paul and company run into an enslaved woman. This is a woman without citizen status. We don't know where she's from exactly, but she is owned by Roman citizens. That is jarring and bothersome to modern ears, just as it should be. But if we could turn off the modern filter now for the next sentence, because it's about to get more jarring and weird, the Bible tells us she had a spirit in her that allowed her to predict the future. I'm not sure that our 21st century brains believe in spirit possessions in the way that first century people did. And I'm not sure we fully buy into telling people's fortunes, but that is what the account says. So let's take it at its word for now. This enslaved person was able to tell people things about their individual futures, or at least fake it really well. Who knows? And the people who owned her used that gift to make money. They charged people to come and have their fortunes told. So the enslaved woman encounters Paul. She sees or hears or just divines something different about this guy. And she starts to follow him around. She follows him and his small band around, and she yells behind them, "Look, here are the servants of the Most High God. These people are proclaiming a way of salvation to you. Listen to them." And she just kept doing that for days, it tells us. So on the one hand, I kind of find this sweet. She's like a one-woman hype squad. And nothing she says is untrue, but Paul found it super annoying, as probably any of us would, right? She's just really drawing the wrong kind of attention. She's not leaving him to do what he needs to do. She's just too much present there. Finally, Paul gets so annoyed. He turns to the woman and commands the spirit inside her to leave. And evidently, from that second on, she had no more fortune-telling abilities. That's worth stopping and thinking about for just a second. I can't explain it at all, but I'm just going to deal with what we're told, and so here's what I see. There was a person in a double bind. She was captive to other humans, and she was captive to some spirit controlling her. So she gets released from one of those binds, but now she's possibly in a worse position than before, because she's still an enslaved person, and now she has less value to her captors. Here's where we can't follow all the trails at once. I would like to know what happens to this lady. We aren't told. So we got to make a choice to choose to keep tracking with Paul and Silas through the next events. I just know that Paul's healing of the woman made her captors mad. That's what drives the story forward. So kind of, in revenge, in spite, they drag Paul and Silas into Roman court and accuse them of being a public nuisance, of disturbing the peace in this great Roman enclave called Philippi. So now we're going to pick up Acts 16, starting at verse 20. When her owners approached the legal authorities, they said, "These people are causing an uproar in our city. They are Jews who promote customs that we Romans can't accept or practice." The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, so that the authorities ordered that they be stripped of their clothes and beaten with a rod. When Paul and Silas had been severely beaten, the authorities threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to secure them with great care. I find that an ironic word for what is actually happening here. Great care. When he received these instructions, the jailer threw them into the innermost cell and secured their feet in stocks. Okay, now we're into the middle of the story. Paul and Silas get thrown into jail for being different, for upsetting those with influence or the closest affiliation to power. They aren't just taken captive, they are beaten severely, and then they're chained to the ground in the center of a pretty big prison complex. And we just met the character who's about to become surprisingly important before the end of the story. It's the unnamed jailer who was told to, take care and secure the prisoners. We pick up at verse 25. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. All at once, there was such a violent earthquake that it shook the prison's foundations. The doors flew open, and everyone's chains came loose. Also worth pausing here. Don't miss the order of events. Paul and Silas, while physically bound, wounded and in pain, are making themselves feel better with songs and prayers. They sing and they pray first before anything better actually happens. Those are acts of spiritual freedom, by the way, used across all of time by captive peoples. When they couldn't free their bodies, they freed their spirits in song and prayer. And the other captives began to notice Paul and Silas. They leaned in, they listened, and something in the physical world shifted. We can call it an earthquake, but I don't know many earthquakes that open chains. Let's just keep calling it an earthquake, because definitely the ground shook beneath them. That's what happened after the prayer. When the jailer awoke and saw the doors of the prison open, he thought the prisoners had escaped. So he drew his sword and was about to kill himself. But Paul shouted loudly, "Don't harm yourself. We're all here." I'm going to say that again because it comes up later. Don't harm yourself. We're all here. The jailer called for some lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He led them outside and said, "Honorable masters, what must I do to be rescued?" Older translations say, "What must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord, and you will be saved, you and your entire household." They spoke Jesus' word to him and to everyone else in his house. And right then, in the middle of the night, the jailer welcomed them and washed their wounds. He and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them into his home and he gave them a meal. He was overjoyed because he and everyone in his household had come to believe in God. That was a pretty sudden reversal of fortunes. So much sudden good that we can easily miss the heartache and the horror of the system that just got subverted. When the shaking stops, the jailer's first reaction is fear. It's terror, really. Terror and despair. Not even a sentence goes by before he's ready to kill himself. And why would a mistake on the job, a mistake beyond your control, be seen as something so horrible you'd rather die than live through the consequences of it? What was not comebackable in this earthquake for this jailer? What is that horrific in his life? If the jailer had lost the prisoners, he'd probably be killed. He'd be tortured first, very likely, shamed at the very, very least, stripped of all position and job, made a disgrace, and an outcast to his community, at the very best, he's going to lose all standing and the ability to support his people. The system the jailer lived in was harsh and unforgiving, even to its own, which causes me to ask, what do you think was in the jailer's head when he shouted the words, "What must I do to be rescued? How can I be saved?" What do we think he wants to be saved from? Is it just death? Or could it be more? And do you see the irony here that the jailer, whose job it is to keep people locked up, was the one who asked to be freed? And that the imprisoned people, who have every motivation to leave when the earthquake makes an opening, chose to stay and remain captives. On a practical note, maybe I'll add that recently beaten men don't move as fast as healthy men, and they are in the middle of giant amounts of rubble, so escape might not have been like a quick getaway, right? It might have been a practical decision to stay as well as anything else. But Paul's read of the situation seems to cut to the heart of it. It's immediate and it's compassionate, and he just makes this judgment call with his voice. We're not going to do anything that causes harm to someone else, even though Paul has just been unfairly harmed. Because plot twist, Paul is a Roman citizen as well as being Jewish. So those other Roman citizens that complained about him and drug him in front of the judge, they didn't actually have the right to do that to Paul. They could do that to plenty of other classes of people. Those could be imprisoned unjustly, but not Paul. A mistake had been made here, and in the light of day, the very next day, the legal authorities are going to come to that jailer and demand that Paul and Silas be released. With some amount of embarrassment, they're going to say, "These men are free to go. Please send them away," hoping that the problem just disappears and we sweep this episode under the rug. Paul must have known he could play the citizen card at any time, but he does not. He does not. And at a critical moment, he leans not into his own rights, but into the needs of his oppressor. Paul literally saves a life with a few words and his physical presence. And the words Paul uses, I want us to hear one more time. I want us to take in and learn and carry around with us because I think they're so useful still. Don't harm yourself. We are all here. We're all here. That is the literal and metaphoric way to save a life, I think. When whatever you are stuck in, be it a way of thinking, a cycle of living, a set of circumstances bigger than your control, whenever that's so huge and oppressive that death seems easier than getting unstuck, you're going to need more people than yourself. You're going to need someone to listen for the sound of imminent harm and call out, "Stop! You're not alone. We are all here." And we'll stay. We're going to stick around for you. When everything feels life and death, because it really is that significant, when everything that you've known stands to pass away, everything you hold dear is at risk, you need people who see beyond whatever it is you've already done, whichever team you're a part of, past the struggle you're stuck in, straight to your deepest need. And you need people who will offer to address that human need. People who will choose to stick around and see what happens. You need people who will stay with you when they don't have to. That's the way of Jesus. And that's the way Jesus' people witness to the world. They stick around. Now, please hear a very important exception. This is not the same idea as saying you should stay with a physical or emotional abuser in any kind of relationship. Culturally and practically, these are not the same example. No faith requires you to continue submitting to abuse. That's not a thing to stick around for. That's a thing to walk away from. Paul and Silas, however, are a different case. They're an example of having every human reason to treat as they've been treated, to dehumanize and dismiss, because they've just been dehumanized and dismissed. And they still choose something else. They still offer something else. What the jailer does with the offer is up to him. If he'd chosen to beat them again, I'd be pro-escape. I'd be all for escape. Paul and Silas act in someone else's best interest. They take a risk to extend a hand. And they just do it to see if compassion can be met with compassion. And this time, it worked. It really, really worked. To make what they did specifically more general in practice, these Jesus people leaned into the other. And they were willing to go more than halfway to do it. They don't even measure what is due or fair or an equal compromise. They just see a human in need and they lean that human's way. And then they wait to see what will happen. As someone who has tried to do the same in lots less dramatic ways in my life, I'm going to say that act of leaning in is rarely simple and never easy. I mean, never for me easy. It gets easier. But it's worth it, because occasionally that lean is the one and only thing that will bring about real change. Paul and Silas's compassion was met with more that night. The person who kept them in chains bandaged their wounds. The same person who locked the chains around their feet put salve and cloth in the same place. The person who'd imprisoned them took them home, and started to work towards repairing the damage he'd participated in. That is a huge shift. I mean, you might even call that an earthquake of emotional proportions. The shift happened not only in social position, but in stance and in soul. It was, all of it, a life-saving change. Acting in good faith still saves lives. Because good faith, the kind that sees people, the kind that values people, the kind that leans into the other people, that faith is life-giving, not death-dealing. If there's death on the table, it's probably not of God. Good faith won't always keep us safe, not from the fallout of angry people or flawed systems, not from abuses of power, not even from the kind of violence that not one human being deserves. Good faith will not always keep us safe. But good faith will keep Christ's compassion in us, even if and when we suffer. And good faith will make more in a world set on less. Good faith will expand the amount of care between people and across people's divides. It will always be life-bringing, life-giving, life-saving. Good faith, like the kind that Jesus walked in, practiced, taught, modeled. That faith will be our rescue. My prayer for me and my prayer for us, and my best hope in this day, is that we will look for that kind of faith in action. We'll try to find it practiced and join into it, make more of it every time we feel the earth shake. Amen.